All right, finally getting around to it. My top 10 favorite records of 2020. Let's get into it. What's going on, everybody? This is Sean of Raw Select Music, and I am finally hitting you with my top 10 favorite records of 2020. Overall, I thought this was a really good year for music, although my tastes seem to shift every year, whether it's a little bit more hip-hop centric or a little bit more electronic music centric. This year was definitely the most jazz heavy of all the years that I've been doing this channel. So I really feel like the quality of a year's music really comes down to where your taste in music lies and the musical choices that you make during the course of the year. And quite honestly, I feel like I made some pretty good choices. There are some records in here that I really think are going to be long-lasting listens for me. But anyways, I've got 10 records that I want to get through right now, and I want to try to get through them as quickly as possible, so I'm not going to waste any more time on an introduction, and let's get into these guys. Coming in at number 10 and just barely is L. Michaels Affair Adult Themes, which won out just due to attrition and the fact that I needed to fit 10 records on this list. And that's not to knock this record, because I really do enjoy it. It's still funky. There's some really heavy drums. I love the menacing atmosphere on it. There's some really, really cool arrangements, and it is a super cinematic record that's very much in line with everything that L. Michaels Affair has done up until this point. I think the reason that it doesn't end up any higher on this list is just largely there are records that I enjoy more than this one. But that being said, in terms of an addition to the L. Michaels Affair catalog, still a great record, still one of the most compelling records that I've heard this year, and still a fantastic listen that in a year where maybe there might have been some less interesting records, I might have ended up listening to it more. But all in all, I still really enjoy this record, and I still really recommend that you give it a listen. So if you haven't checked out L. Michaels Affair Adult Themes, definitely worth your time, definitely worth a listen, and definitely worthy of a spot in my top 10 favorite records of 20. Coming in at number 9, Suarve's Sunny Days Blue EP on Black Focus Record. A record that I originally thought was going to end up way higher on this list, and shortly after picking it up, it really just sort of dropped down in favorites as it quickly became overcome by other records that I just enjoy more than this one. Which is not to say it's a bad record. All in all, I think Suarve is really strutting and stuff on this record. Stronger songwriting, stronger production. It's still lo-fi, but it's richer than a lot of the other lo-fi music that's out there. The fact that he's moved away from doing straight hip-hop instrumentals into more musical, more live instrumentation style music, and showing that he can do it with style and finesse is an absolutely incredible feat. It's just for some reason I'm more compelled to listen to a lot of the other records on this list, but there's still a lot of great tracks on here. Specifically, Smile is one of my favorite tracks of the year. The atmosphere on Ginger is absolutely enveloping and one of my favorite tracks of the year as well. And I really love the track No Compute, which is probably the most groove-heavy song on this record, and it just has a second to none atmosphere on it that makes me think that I need to go back to this record a lot more. If you haven't checked this one out and you're looking for something a little bit more down-tempo, Suarve's Sunny Days Blue is definitely a highly recommended album and definitely worthy of a spot on my best of the year list. Similar to the previous two records on this list. We've got Mark DeClive Lowe's Dreamweavers record. Again, an album that I thought early on was going to end up way higher on my list, and just got knocked out because there were records that I enjoy more than this one. And yet does not take away from the fact that this is a super high quality modern jazz release from Mark DeClive Lowe and his co-collaborators. It's definitely one of the more jazz focused records in this list. Definitely seems more focused on being more traditional instead of focusing on trying to mix in a bunch of other genres, which do still show up on here, but the real heart and soul of this record is definitely jazz with a little bit of a modern twist to it. And that's still really, really cool. I love a lot of the vibe on here. There's some really, really impressive tracks in the song Drolling Down Deganan, Degnan, which just has this super slick groove, as well as this really delicate, pristine, and serene atmosphere to it. And overall, it's just a great record to listen to. I do appreciate some of the diversions into other genres like electronic music and broken beat. And overall, it's still a really enjoyable record that has a wide variety of sounds on it, so it never gets too samey. That I definitely feel like I should go back to it more and give it even more time, even though I listened to it pretty much nonstop when it first came out. So if you haven't checked out Dreamweavers and you're looking for some closer to traditional jazz with a little bit of a modern twist, Dreamweavers is a super easy record to get into and easily one of my favorite records of the year, and definitely worthy of a spot in this top 10 list.
I feel kind of fly standing next to you, baby girl. How do I look in my do-rag? Would you tell me the truth? Stay with me and love me through the night, endlessly. I'ma keep.
All right, coming up next is Thundercats. It Is What It Is. I will swear up and down, while Drunk is by far, I think, the most enjoyable and most replayable of all of Thundercats' records, It Is What It Is by far his most cohesive album project to date. There's a certain flow to it. It never feels like, even when he does move outside of the more solemn and wistful atmosphere that pervades a lot of the music on here, it doesn't feel like it's going off in these really disparate, weird directions that really don't belong on this album. And it still feels cohesive and coherent as a listen throughout. The funny moments on here, Dragon Ball Durag still remains one of my favorite tracks of the year, as well as the absolute insanity of I Love Lewis Cole, with some of the best lyrics that Thundercat and Lewis Cole have ever come up with that are both really funny, really relatable, and really touching at the same time. You could definitely tell that there is a lot of Mac Miller mourning going on this record, and it really does make for a very touching, powerful, emotional listen, especially in the second half of this record. It's not really a huge stretch musically for Thundercat and his list of collaborators, but it definitely feels like it's the tightest thing musically that he's done today. If you haven't listened to this one yet and you're not a fan and you haven't really listened to Thundercat's music up until this point, I think this is probably the greatest record to get into, and I still think it's one of my favorite records of the year, despite being one of the first records that I picked up this year. So if you haven't listened to Thundercats, It Is What It Is, definitely worthy of a spot on this list, and definitely one of my favorite records of 2020. All right. Alright, I really did not expect this record to run up the list as quickly as it did, since I didn't pick this album up until about 2 weeks ago. The more I listen to it, the more addicted I get to it, the more my criticisms in the review for it I did seem to dwindle a little bit, and the more my enthusiasm for this record seems to increase. And that's Konsanos Susanna, released on Origami Productions. I am absolutely in love with this record. Konsano seems to be pushing more of a J-pop sound by way of combining his love of hip-hop, electronic music, and dance pop all into one, and it's working. I think it really is just the fact that he's enhancing and improving the sounds things that he's shown off on all of his previous releases and just making them that much tighter and that much more memorable. The pop hooks are really strong on here. The dance pop tracks actually grow on you, largely due to some overflowing creative energy as well as just being catchy as all hell. His production overall just becomes richer and richer over time, and I'm starting to feel the lyrics out a little bit more, even though my Japanese isn't nearly as strong as I'd like it to be. Pretty much this record runs nothing but highlights the whole way through from front to back, and even the more pop-heavy side of the B-side of this record, I'm starting to fall more in love with. This is a record that over time may replace some of the records that are on this list, but as of right now, it's still a noteworthy release in a year of super noteworthy releases. And if you're looking for a great little gap bridger into the world of J-pop with still a little bit of a Western sensibility to it, Konsanos Susanna is an excellent, excellent record, and definitely one that I think everyone should check out. Continuing the trend of records that I really thought were going to end up higher on this list, but just got knocked down over time by other records that are exciting me a little bit more. Yet, that is not to take away from the overall quality of a record like Greg Fote's Symphony Pacific, which ends up in my number 5 slot. The arrangements on it are super cool. Of all the jazz records that I picked up this year, this one might be the most groove heavy, except for one more that's going to appear later on this list. I love the lush arrangements on here. So many strings, so many horns, so many synths, so many grooves, so many ideas. This is a record that just seemingly never ceases to impress me throughout its nearly hour-long runtime, and it never bores me over the course of its hour-long runtime. It's constantly creative, constantly fascinating. It's just a super fun record to listen to. Not a chin scratcher. This is just a straight-up fun record to listen to. The cover indicates that it's going to be a super colorful listen, and it does not disappoint. This is a record that I knew nothing about when I picked it up earlier this year, and it is a record that has stuck with me throughout the entirety of this year. Front to back highlights, definitely recommended, and definitely worthy of a spot on my best of 2020 list.
When you play by the
We've got Glenn Astro's Homespun. Wow, I did not expect this record to end up this high. Early on, when I first started listening to it, I just found it so indescribable. And at first, I really seemingly struggled to find words to describe it. And it felt so elusive and didn't really stick with me for the longest time. But over multiple replays, I found there is so much to enjoy about this. Glenn Astro's playfulness of so many different musical genres: house music, electronic music, drum and bass, neo soul, new age, pretty much everything but the kitchen sink appears on this record. And there's an emotional weight to it that a lot of his co-producers' productions, Max Grafe's albums, simply lack. If you give it enough time, there's something to latch onto musically with this record. And it's an album that really demands that you give it a chance. So definitely a record that I was not expecting to enjoy as much as I did, but over time I've just found it indispensable and a record that I enjoy going back to more and more. If you're looking for an album of electronic music that's very unique and very distinct from a lot of the more straightforward sounds out there, and something that you can meld with your couch with while wearing headphones, Glenn Astro's Homespun is a fantastic listen and definitely a record that I recommend everyone check out from 2020. Coming in. Coming in at number 3 is actually one of the first 2020 records that I picked up this year, and that is Juicy the Emissary's Timber. And this is weird because on the sleeve it says it came out in 2019, but according to Discogs it came out in 2020, as well as Street Corner Music's own website. So I'm gonna call this a 2020 release, and it deserves to end up on this list. Holy shit, whoever thought since maybe DJ Shadow's introducing that album of all instrumental hip-hop productions could have so much emotional heft to them. Juicy the Emissary's mix of samples, synths, guitars, and vocal sounds comes together in a way that is unlike any other instrumental hip-hop album I've ever heard. It's indescribable, the emotion that I get from listening to this record. It's immaculately produced. There are actually a great number of head nod moments on here, but the reason that I keep coming back to it is the focus on melody is so strong on here and so potent and so powerful, and there's these extremely welling feelings of nostalgia that come with listening to this record that there's really nothing quite like it out there. And it is an album that I've listened to on and off throughout 2020 that really still sticks out in my mind as one of the greatest albums of this year. If you haven't checked out Street Corner Music's Juicy the Emissary Timber, definitely the best instrumental hip-hop project of the year. Definitely one of the best releases on Street Corner Music, and definitely worth everyone's time, and definitely deserving of a spot on my best of 2020 top 10 list. All right, these last two records took me forever to figure out where they were gonna go on my list. Much like previous years, 2 and 1 are slightly interchangeable. But the great thing about doing these videos is it forces me to be decisive of which record goes where, and this record got so close to ending up in my number 1 slot. And that's Jamal Williams' Woo Hen, released on Black Focus. I can't believe it. Like, I stated this in the review, the recommendation video that I did on this album. I can't believe that they managed to come through and basically address every little quibble that I've had with Jamal Williams' albums up until this point. This literally is everything I was looking for. It's atmospheric, it's to the point, groove heavy, it's more melodically focused. Everything just feels that much sharper and that much more refined, and everything just feels like it's so much more confident than the stuff before. Gone are the super long, overly redundant, repetitive jams of some of their previous tracks, and everything on here just feels like it has the right amount of punch, the right amount of groove, the right amount of musical progression and dynamics. It never feels like any idea overstays its welcome. It's thick with atmosphere and melody. It's just got everything that I was looking for and then some. The addition of Miguel Atwood Ferguson's strings and harp, holy shit, does it bring another musical layer to these tracks. And the addition of more prominent saxophone on here, and the overall just quality of the saxophone playing on here is so much better than what I expected. The songs just being that much more immediate and that much more attention grabbing, it really just blew everything else out of the water when it came to the genre of modern jazz. This is a record that I haven't listened to as much as some of the other albums on this list, yet it's an album that I frequently look forward to going back to, and every time that I start playing it, I inevitably end up listening to it more and more. And with all that being said, while it got super close to getting into my number 1 slot, Jamal Williams' Woo Hen ends up at number 2, just barely being bumped out by... You should have saw this coming. Tavares Tavares, Leland Whitty, Visions, released on Mr. Bongo. Now, I should state upright, and I think I forgot to do this in the review for this record, I am a huge fan of Bad Bad Not Good. I still think, when it comes to modern jazz, they are the king of the crop. They are that much better than everyone else out there. So as soon as I heard that Bad Bad Not Good was on hiatus or broken up, super disheartened, but I was very happy to learn that their keyboard player, Matthew Tavares, was putting out music, hence why I checked out the Maddie album. And then when I found out that he was putting out an album with Leland Whitty, which you may recognize as the on and off collaborative saxophone player from Bad Bad Not Good, I got immediately excited for this, not knowing exactly what I was going to get into. And while this is probably the most experimental record of everything that I talked about on this list so far, it's by far the most rewarding. This is the record that I hear something new and different every time that I listen to. The tracks are generally pretty improvisationally focused, which means that there's a lot of space where it feels like they're working out their ideas. But when they get to the musical payoffs on these jazz-laden, modern, classical-informed post-rock with a little bit of Brazilian influence all thrown in together tracks, the payoff is so much greater than anything else that I've heard this year. There is really not a single song on here that sounds the same, and from front to back, it doesn't feel like there's an idea or sound wasted on here. Simply put, I think this is some of the most beautiful music that I've heard this year, and it is a record that I know I am going to love the more that I listen to. Even though I've only had it for the last 2 weeks, I've been listening to it nonstop, and even though it isn't constantly engaging, the moments where it really does grab my attention, it does so in a way that no other record on this list has managed to do, and that's pretty much all I can say about it. If you haven't listened to this record for yourself, I know for a fact that it's not for everyone, but man, if it manages to grab your attention, grab your imagination, and grab your inspiration the way it has for me, I guarantee that this record right here, Matthew Tavares and Leland Whitty's Visions, has a strong chance of being your favorite record of 2020 the same way that it is for me. And with all those reasons combined, that this ends up in my number one slot for the awful, awful, awful fucking year that was 2020. So that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thanks, as always, for watching. If you've checked out any of these records for yourself, please let me know what you thought about them down in the comments. If you want to hear any of these records for yourself, please head over to my WordPress blog, because that's where I'll be posting music links to any of the records that I talk about on this channel. Please make sure you check out Live from the Record Room, 8 p.m. Japan Standard Time every Sunday for a usual 2-hour live stream of some of the records that I talk about on this channel, as well as some of the other records that I don't get a chance to talk about on this channel. And make sure you head over to my Mixcloud, where you can check out Raw Select Radio, the audio component of this YouTube channel. Links to everything, as always, down in the description. But that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thanks, as always, for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. So until then, peace out!